Welcome to this special interview with Dr. Delia Grace Randolph, recipient of the 2022 Arrell Global Food Innovation Award for Research Impact. Delia's career has indeed been impactful, a career dedicated to improving food systems and food safety across the globe. I'm Jeff Wichtel. I'm Dean of the Ontario Veterinary College at the University of Guelph, and I've been inspired by Delia's work ever since I first heard her speak about her work some years ago. She explained to me in terms I could easily understand the global impact of failed food systems on the safety of food and thus the health and well-being of millions of people around the world, and how these issues were so often poorly understood and addressed. My co-host today is Sugandha Raj. Sugandha, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Dr. Jeff. Hello, everyone. I am Sugandha Raj, a PhD student in Department of Pathobiology, working in low pathogenic avian influenza studies. It's been an absolute pleasure to be amongst all of us, and we welcome Dr. Delia with us today. I have been very inspired by her work towards food systems and how it can impact it can have impact on the global level. Dr. Delia, we sincerely welcome you here. And I would now give the platform Dr. Jeff to go on further with the interview.
Sure, in a minute we'll introduce our guests, but first I'd like to acknowledge that the University of Guelph, where I'm fortunate to work, is situated within the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit and is part of the land between the Lakes Purchase, i.e. Treaty Number 3. The dish with one spoon covenant made between Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas is an agreement to share territory and protect these lands, now known as parts of Ontario, Quebec, and New York State. The covenant reminds us of our common connection to the land and to each other. Recognizing the contributions and importance of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples is an important part of our collective commitment to make the promise of truth and reconciliation real in our communities. Now over to Sugandha to introduce our guest.
It's my pleasure to formally introduce Dr. Delia Grace Randolph as our guest today. Dr. Delia is a professor of food safety systems at the Natural Resources Institute at University of Greenwich. She's also joint appointed scientist at International Livestock Research Institute in Nairobi, where she also worked in the informal markets for more than 20 years. Not only that, she is also a renowned scientist with unique and transformative impacts on the safety of food systems and public health in developing countries. As a trained vet and epidemiologist, she brings a special expertise on the interconnectedness of animal and human health and eco-health to her work. A focus of her work is improving food safety in informal markets in the developing countries. Dr. Delia, we send our heartfelt congratulations on winning the Arrell Global Food Innovation Award for Research Impact, and thank you so much for joining with us today.
Delia, as a recipient of this award, you've clearly made an impact on food systems. We'd like to ask you just a few questions to learn more about your work. First of all, can you explain to our audience the connection between animal health and human health, which seems to be central to your work, and why it's important to study and understand?
Yes, thank you for the question. And I'd like to just start, though, by saying how delighted I am to be here virtually with you all, and how important and meaningful this award is. And so I'm so happy to be the recipient. My work, as you have mentioned, has been very much at the nexus of animal, human, and environment health, where they come together. And there's a concept called One Health, which unfortunately maybe many people have been exposed to during this past terrible pandemic of COVID virus. And this is the belief, the concept that the health of humans, animals, and the environment, or the planet more largely, are closely interdependent. And we cannot have healthy humans without healthy animals and a healthy environment for them to live in.
Great. Thanks very much, Sugandha.
Yeah. Dr. Delia, I'm a veterinarian too, and I'm very much intrigued to go ahead with the second question. So what, according to you, do you think where you have seen some risks and issues which are associated with the disconnection between animal and human health. As you just mentioned, the One Health issue. I'm very much familiar with that whole concept. But can you just throw some light on this issue where you see some disconnections?
Yes, I'm afraid we live in a disconnected world, and wherever you look, you can see these disconnections and the bad effects of them. But in the discipline of One Health and more broadly epidemiology, we often look at three particular areas which fall at the intersection of animal, human, and environment health. And these are firstly zoonoses, which are the diseases which can spread from animals to people. And again, within zoonosis, we sometimes differentiate between emerging or new zoonoses, which have appeared for the first time or have spread quickly to a new place. Diseases like COVID, mad cow disease, West Nile, and also the neglected zoonosis, which are these zoonoses which have been around for a very, very long time. Since the pharaohs and before, diseases like brucellosis, tuberculosis, and these have been largely controlled in high-income countries, but they are still rampant and uncontrolled in low and middle-income countries where I work. The second of the three issues is the area where I've been working especially, which is foodborne disease. Actually, most of the major foodborne diseases, more than 60% are zoonotic, that is transmitted between animals and people. And foodborne diseases are again, a problem which originates in agriculture. And I must say, as a vet, I'm a little sorry to say it, that quite a lot of the problems come from animal agriculture. In general, animal source foods, be they meat, milk, eggs, fish, are somewhat more risky than plant foods. So these foods which agriculture or capture brings to our table can also bring diseases to us. And these foodborne diseases impose a huge health and economic burden. The third area, which I think is particularly relevant to One Health and where One Health can play a role, is another fairly emerging area of antimicrobial resistance. And what this means is that the bacterial infections, which are still very common among people, again, especially in low and middle income countries, are starting to become resistant to the drugs, the antimicrobials that previously were very effective at curing these diseases. And this resistance is purely the result of human action. It's due to the overuse and misuse of antibiotics, firstly in humans, but also in animals. And in fact, the best estimates are that more than twice as much by weight antimicrobials are used in animal agriculture than in people. So obviously, unless we manage use in animal agriculture, we're not going to be able to manage antimicrobial resistance as a human disease. So yes, those are the three big areas, if you like, the big three: zoonoses, foodborne disease, and antimicrobial resistance.
I completely agree with you, because all three aspects of the human, animal, and the environment are completely balanced into each other. And even one of them is overpowering other, it leads to imbalance and disastrous events. Over to you, Dr. Jeff. Would you like to go ahead with the next question, please?
Sure. Thanks, Sugandha. Yes, you mentioned your work with the lower and middle income countries. Can you tell us just maybe a little more specifics about your work with informal markets, which have been, much in the news over the last couple of years related to the COVID outbreaks? Who do you work with? How do you work with them? And what have you learned from those?
Yes, I mean, I also am a vet by initial training. So my career started on the farm, and over the years I've made my way slowly towards the fork as I've worked more and more with informal markets and the food that is sold in them. This work started in Africa and has since expanded to South Asia and Southeast Asia. Basically, informal markets are very understudied and little is known about them. But as evidence grows, it is becoming quite evident, quite clear that nearly in low and middle income countries, where of course 4 billion of the world's population live, the great majority of fresh foods are sold in informal markets. And these markets are especially where poor people sell their food and poor people buy their food. What's more, it's these informal markets, the food sold in these informal markets, that are mainly responsible for the great global burden of foodborne disease, which to many people's surprise, this burden, this health burden, is actually as large, comparable to the burden of HIV/AIDS, malaria, or TB. So my work has been in these informal markets, working with the vendors, the consumers, working on innovations, on training and policy, trying to improve their capacity, their ability to sell safe, nutritious food, to benefit themselves, to benefit their consumers. I'll just add quickly that, as you said, there's been a lot of concern. I think there was a little bit of surprise when people saw these informal markets, and that they really are, I think that there's a phrase, a buzzing, blooming confusion. So there's everything going on, some live animals, some meat, milk, eggs, sometimes plastic shoes, many people selling, many people buying. And sometimes when people who are not used to these markets look at them, they think, there's a problem. These should be stopped. Something is wrong here. But when you look more deeply, you can see, yes, there are definitely areas for improvement. But at the same time, these markets provide incredible services. They provide fresh, nutritious, cheap food to people who need it. They provide employment, and many of the people in these markets are women. It's an area where women tend to dominate in informal selling and processing, and they're part of the community, especially in some places, perhaps a little more in Asia than in Africa. Informal markets where people go to, tourists come, people go to hang out, people come to connect with other people. So yes, improve the informal markets, but really, my work, I've come to the conclusion that they are the solution. They're not the problem. We need to work with them, not against them.
Great, thanks. I think that's very timely advice. As we consider these complex food systems, and a good caution that we don't make decisions or recommendations that are in isolation of the broader social importance of these markets. So thank you for that. Sugandha.
Thank you, Dr. Delia, for that answer. I totally agree with you, because I have been associated with women empowerment back in India, and I have helped them promote backyard poultry farming. And it's true that it might have some cons of any bacterial infection in backyard poultry or any sort of viral infection, but the truth is we cannot neglect them, because ultimately that is also a source of economy for them, and their whole business, their whole livelihood depends upon them. And yes, these markets, they are a huge source of growth, but sometimes things happen which are not under control, which leads to unprecedented times. So yes, it's more like we have to move cautiously, but in a more planned way. So I totally agree with you. Thank you for that enlightening answer. So my next question too is, like you mentioned before, that foodborne diseases might have zoonotic implications. So what, according in your knowledge, you think, like how the farmers, the provincial government, and different organizations, they can come together, and how they can work to improve the food safety systems that can help promote the community and the environment?
Yes, I mean, I think foodborne disease and food safety is an issue which really requires people coming together and coordination. So that is very central. One person, one actor cannot solve this independently, individually. We often talk about the farm to fork or the boat to throat chain, which implies that it requires actions all the way along, from production to consumption, and beyond consumption to waste disposal, recycling, upcycling, in order to have a properly functioning food safety system. Within this system, everyone has a role to play. in my work, we've sometimes used this sort of concept or image of the three-legged stool, which says there are three essential components for a safe food system. The first is the enabling environment. And this is where the government comes in. We must have the right policies, and they must be implemented. Too often we see either policies are inappropriate, or the standards are too high, or more often we may have good standards, but they're unenforceable. So in these conditions, we don't have enabling environment. We don't have policy and regulation playing the optimal role it can. The second leg of the stool, if you like, is the vendors. And vendors need benefit from capacity building, a combination of training and innovation. And this training, again, it has to be appropriate, simple, adapted to adults. We've had good successes with just training people in the places they work, maybe for a couple of hours, once or twice a week. And these people have been ignored. We tend to find that farmers have received, they get more training, they get more support, but vendors are sometimes treated, especially in informal markets, as the middlemen, the middlewomen, and nobody is rushing to help them. So they're often very interested and very grateful to get this attention and this help. And again, innovation, and this is where research can help too, with bringing in these simple innovations. The cold chain was a great innovation. It made food very safe in high-income countries, but there are simple innovations too, such as treated nets to keep flies away from food, even things like hand sanitizer, bleach, thermometers to read the temperature of meat. These are all innovations that can improve food safety. And then the third leg, and the leg which I would say has been most neglected, but without this, we will never have safe food. And that is incentives, motivations, reasons to change behavior. And too much in the past, the experts and the policymakers have just seen food safety as an obligation, something you should do because this is the right thing. But we know that humans don't act like that unless there are rewards or punishments or nudges or some direct benefit from changing behavior, then behavior will not change. So when these three things come together, an enabling environment, capacity building for the vendors, and incentives for behavior change, then I think, and only then, can we achieve safe food.
Great, Dr. Delia. That was really, really great. I do completely agree with you on that point. Dr. Jeff, would you like to go ahead with the next question, please?
Sure, thanks. Just sort of a last question that's more general and open-ended. Do you have any advice for new researchers or scientists that are working in similar fields?
I'd say that these are great fields to be working in. Food safety and informal markets, more broadly, One Health, EcoHealth. They're what we might call the sunrise research areas, which are already much has been done, but there's so much more that could be done. And everybody is looking to these areas. They were perhaps neglected in the past. They were definitely neglected in the past. But now I think, and also coming out of this last terrible zoonotic pandemic, is an amazing time for researchers to get engaged in these areas and to be oriented towards not just publishing papers, but towards developing solutions that will benefit people, make food safer, make people healthier, make animals and the environment healthier.
Oh, thanks, Delia. That's great advice. And I think we can see from what you've presented here today that there's plenty to do in this field, and that much of the research and innovations that could be highly impactful are quite possible. When you talk about your three pillars or legs to your stool, what you talked about there are not things that are necessarily difficult to do, but just require some concentrated attention in ways that I think you've presented that are quite possible for the future. So an optimistic view.
It's more about being collaborative than being competitive to control all these three aspects of One Health.
Thanks, Delia. Did you have any final words that you'd wanted to share with us today?
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to acknowledge everyone without whom this would not have been possible. Firstly and foremost, the sellers in informal markets, the men and women, the consumers and the farmers and who got the food to the markets. But secondly, I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues at the International Livestock Research Institute and Natural Resources Institute, whose work over the last 2 to 3 decades have led to these findings and this award, and especially John McDermott, also from formerly of Guelph University, who has actually initiated much of this work in informal markets.
So in closing, thank you, Delia, for giving us so much of your time today to speak with us. It's been a pleasure and an honor to have this opportunity to learn more about your work. And thank you, viewers, for tuning into this interview. We hope that you've come away with a new insight and are inspired by what you've heard today as we have been. And congratulations again to Delia, the Research Impact winner of the 2022 Arrell Global Food Innovation Award. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.